Measures to tackle the high cost of renting are being announced by the government today. It's being seen as an acceptance that for some people, owning their own home will never happen.
Hello, I'm Cordelia. I've been renting in the private rental sector for over 20 years and I will never own my own home.
Hello, I am Constantine. I am a regulated tenant, which means I can stay in my home for life and I pay a fair rent.
Hello, I'm Hepsy and I rent as well, and I've resigned myself to the fact that I will probably have to rent for the rest of my life.
Does that sound like you? If you rent, have you given up hope of ever buying your own property? What would you like to see the government announce today? The government's setting out its strategy for fixing what it says is a broken housing market in England and hitting its target of building 1 million new homes by the year 2020. Plans will include more help for first-time buyers and measures to make rental agreements more secure. Duncan Kennedy reports.
Britain's house building programme has been underperforming for decades. Today the government says it's time to change. It wants councils to put pressure on developers to speed up, but also says it wants to protect green belt land wherever possible.
Prices are too high, we are not building enough homes, and this white paper is a radical blueprint to change this once and for all.
The government says it wants more pre-built houses to help create homes faster. But for some, like Jennifer Tristram, the only choice is to rent or go into shared ownership.
When I was looking, I remember there wasn't that much option out there for what I wanted and what I could afford. And I think like anybody who's in that same situation will probably be feeling that struggle more, probably even more so than I did when I was looking.
The government says smaller builders should get help to boost the housing stock and is encouraging older people to downsize, so long as they have alternatives. Labour says the government's housing strategy is in a mess, and today's white paper is a rehash of old ideas. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News.
Let's talk to our political guru, Norman Smith, who is outside number 10. So what difference will these plans make, do you think, Norman?
Well, it depends whether the plans become reality, because let's be honest, we have had so many different government plans on housing and it really hasn't cracked the basic problem, which is to get more houses built. And one significant thing today, the government are pretty much again saying hands off the green belt. So for many developers, they will say, well, look, the difficulty is we simply can't access sufficient land to build the vast number of houses that are meant. However, one interesting aspect of today's plans is we are seeing a definite tweak away from the idea that everyone should own a home to maybe just settling for renting a home. And that in a way is a recognition of the fact that house prices have just gone crazy. They are unaffordable for many, many people and they're simply not going to be able to own a home. Now that is completely different, if you like, to the Thatcher years, even the David Cameron years, where it was thought there was an instinctive aspiration that people wanted to own a home, and that's what the government ought to seek to do. Now, the government are trying to encourage developers to build more flats, to rent, to encourage longer tenancies, and to shift the market more in favour of renting in the hope that might enable more people to get a decent roof over their head.
Thank you very much, Norman. For the moment, we know that renting is a huge issue for you. Finding an affordable, decent place to rent, massive for you, I know that. So do get in touch with your own experiences and your own views on the government's plans, which we'll be talking about in a bit more detail just after 9:30. The housing system is broken, even the government says so. They're going to try and do something about it. Plans include forcing councils to produce an up-to-date plan for housing demand, reducing the time allowed between planning permission and the start of building from 3 to 2 years. A lifetime ISA to help first-time buyers save for a deposit. But what's also expected is a change of tone from previous Tory announcements, with a focus on people who are renting their homes and perhaps an acceptance that some people will never be able to afford to buy their own house. Plans are expected to include minimum tenancy lengths to try and offer renters more security, and a drive to build more homes specifically for rent. With us this morning, a group of people who will rent, some who are desperate to get on the property market and can't. Also with us, Conservative MP Andrew Mitchell, who's been campaigning against building houses on Greenbelt land, and David Smith from the Residential Landlords Association, representing landlords in England and Wales. Welcome, all of you. Right, let's have a giant conversation about this, shall we? Andrew Mitchell, it's your government who are announcing the plans today. If the housing market's broken, then you need more, surely, than another target for building more homes. and a minimum length of tenancy?
Well, I think there's a lot to be welcomed in this white paper today. We haven't seen it, of course, yet, but it's been pretty extensively leaked. And as I understand it, what it's trying to do is enable everyone to have a home. It's changing it in precisely the way you described. It's not just about home ownership, it's about rental, and it's about making sure that there are far more homes built in the future. And as a constituency member of Parliament, I really understand that, because I talk to sixth formers, to those who can't get on the housing ladder, those who can't rent, those who want a home and can't get it. And I think that this white paper will enable all those different sections to have a better chance in the future than they've had in the past. The point that I make is that you have to build these homes in the right places.
Not on greenbelt land.
And in the case of my constituency of Royal Sutton Coldfield, we are faced with houses on our green belt when there are plenty of other alternatives, and the Conservative councillors in Birmingham, in Sutton Coldfield, have demonstrated how you can build the same number of homes without doing so on the green belt.
But across England, you can't build 250,000 homes a year, so the experts say, which is the government's new target, another target. We'll see if they achieve it. You can't build that number of homes unless you use greenbelt land as well.
Now, I don't agree with that. I think that you have to be much more imaginative. You have to build communities and not just housing. You have to focus on decontaminating old industrial land. You have to focus on building on brown field land. You have to focus on more creative schemes in inner cities. And you only build on the greenbelt as a last resort. And if it is a last resort, then it should be built on. But the point I make on behalf of the 100,000 people who I represent, who are adamantly opposed to this and who have always shown themselves willing and keen to build more homes, is that you don't have to do it on the greenbelt until all other opportunities are exhausted.
Can I respond to that, please?
Of course you can.
Andrew, this white paper going to be published by government today was a clear opportunity for government to come up with a coherent strategy for building the 300,000 homes we desperately need in this country every year to both meet current household formation and deal with the backlog. What it is, what they've actually published, and if the press release is anything to go by, is just a rehashing, recycling of things that have been announced already. They've failed to build on the greenbelt, and you're living in la-la land if you think that you can build the homes we need without building on the greenbelt. They've failed to allow local authorities to borrow to build homes. They've failed to reform stamp duty for first-time buyers. All we've got is some weak aspirations on renter security in the private sector.
Well, let me respond to that. First of all, in the specific case of Sutton Coldfield, you are not correct in what you say. We have shown where these homes could be built without desecrating our green belt, and we are enthusiastic about building more homes, but they've got to be in the right place. On the second point,
not in your backyard.
No, it's absolutely not that, because we've shown ourselves very willing to build in the town to increase density. We are absolutely clear. We want our children and grandchildren to be able to live in the same sort of homes and opportunities that our generation had, but it's got to be built in the right place. But the second point is you are demeaning the white paper before you've even seen it. Now, you know, I am critical of one respect, but I accept that ministers are addressing this problem, and you shouldn't demean it, at least until you've heard what the Secretary of State has to say this afternoon in the House of Commons.
You say trying to find a decent place to rent is like being on the X Factor. Why?
Yeah, absolutely. I went to look for a room recently. I was evicted on Christmas Eve. I went to see a room.
Why were you evicted?
Well, actually, it's interesting Andrew's here. I was evicted by a Conservative councillor. I won't name him because he's not here to defend himself. He was a former mayor of Barnet. He had a building of 16 people were living in there with one shower. It was a house of multiple occupation. He was found not to have a licence. He bought that building for £1,300,000 and was fined less than £5,000 for it.
Okay, I don't know that story. As you say, he's not here to defend himself.
Absolutely.
But you say you were evicted, so we'll take you at your word. How come you've moved 7 times in 10 years?
I think it's a few things. I think we need a mandatory kind of register for landlords. I think we have too many landlords who after 6 months or a year can decide that they just want to up the rent. It's a problem of this type of NIMBYism, that if we don't build more homes everywhere, particularly in central London, then of course there's a supply and demand issue, and actually the landlords can charge what they want. I think to hear Andrew say that, it's unfortunate Andrew was the minister who described someone as a pleb. the idea that we can't have homes in rural Sutton Coldfield, apart from instead of the centre where there's more likely to be Labour voters, we can't build where there's more likely to be
Respond to that
Conservative
briefly,
voters.
and then I want to bring everyone else in.
That's a sort of political attack, but on the core point...
Well, you are a politician, Andrew.
Well, I mean, this white paper is trying to address exactly the problem which you face, which is that you haven't got somewhere to live.
My understanding is the government wants to build more homes, affordable homes for renting.
That's already been announced. That was announced in the autumn statement. That's not new in this white paper.
But as an aspiration, as an ambition, as a target, you would welcome that?
Absolutely, but they already announced that in the autumn statement.
Fair enough.
I wanted to see something new from this white paper.
Well,
Trevor, go on.
My question to Andrew is, if you build more homes, how does that help me as someone that's locked into renting? I've got no other option but to rent.
Exactly.
Can I rent a brand new, newly built home?
Well, we have to wait until we see what is in the white paper. But the problem that you have identified, and the problem that you have identified, consistently, ministers have been saying they want to address this. So they want to make sure that if you are in the rented sector, there are more opportunities. There are more places for you to rent, that more houses are built for rent, and that people are encouraged both to be able to rent and to make property available for rent. So, you know, the problem which you have rightly identified is exactly the issue that ministers are trying to address.
Constantine, sorry, David. Go on, David, and then I'll bring in...
The government's problem to some extent, which is trailed in the white paper, is actually partly the same thing that Andrew has complained about in the white paper. The government is desperately wedded, and is wedded again in this white paper, to institutional investment. Institutional investment has been talked about for 20 years. I'm waiting. The majority of landlords are relatively small landlords. The problem with the Greenbelt and people wanting to build the Greenbelt is institutional investors want to build in the Greenbelt because they want to build big developments. If the government paid more attention to the smaller landlords who provide the majority of housing, and that certainly includes making sure there's proper enforcement against those bad landlords, I completely agree with that, then actually the ability to develop the small areas that Andrew would like to see is much more likely to happen.
Constantine, tell us about your arrangement, because it sounds like good practice to me.
I am a regulated tenant.
Explain what that means.
Which means that I can stay there for life and I have a fair rent. The dark side is that there's a lot of harassment, is what I call sometimes long-term destruction of a life, because if you get rid of a regulated tenant, then you make a lot of money by being able to resell it. But however, the formula, having tenancy for life and paying a fair rent, is something that works perfectly well in Germany. And the companies make a good solid profit by the property owning companies. And this is something we should be considering introducing here. Good profit for the landlord, security and peace of mind, safety in your home for the tenant. That's perfect to me.
What's your experience, Hepsi?
Well, at the moment, I'm really lucky because my landlord's brilliant. We have a great communication. If anything, we need anything, then we can, he will come in a second and fix it. But I lived in a house before where we had horror stories. I had a landlady who told us that she was spying on us, and she did up the rent by about £400. And we hear, like, lots of my friends have horror stories. So I think, yes, if you can make rent where you take out that tremulous feeling, because I think that's the thing that I find as somebody who's rented for about 7 years. I want to feel I'm happy. I've resigned myself to the fact that unless my situation changes, I will probably have to rent for the rest of my life.
Who else is in that, feels they're in that scenario?
Yeah.
Very much in that situation.
Trevor, do you mind me asking how old you are?
I'm 68, so, you know, I'm going to be in rented accommodation for the rest of my life because there are no options open to me. Financially, I can't buy a house, get a mortgage. No one's going to give me a mortgage at my age in the late 60s. 68, you know, I've got to rent.
And you feel the same? You're never going to own your own home?
I'm 55. I did own a property with my first husband many years ago.
Right.
Since divorce, I've been in the private rental sector for the last 20 years. Difficult and unstable, very, very expensive, very unstable. I have 3 children, the oldest of whom is now 31, my youngest is 19 and at university. So technically now I have no dependents. But I have, because my daughter needs somewhere to come home to in university holidays. My second husband died suddenly at the end of 2014. So we're in a position now where we would have been homeless were it not for loans and the kindness of family and friends. We would certainly have been homeless. Because my single income does not meet any of the affordability criteria for a house in South East London.
Would you all welcome, sorry, this is a no-brainer question, minimum lengths of tenancies?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Well, some security of tenure anyway.
Okay, David Smith, on behalf of landlords, what sort of minimum length would be acceptable to you and your members?
It's not really about setting a minimum length. Different people have different needs.
That's what the government's apparently going to do.
Well, the government's white paper is proposing an incentive for minimum lengths for institutional landlords. It's not proposing minimum lengths across the board.
Okay.
The difficulty with minimum lengths is that if you have a minimum length with, say, rent capped during that minimum length, as soon as that minimum length is up,
the rent will
shoot up.
Do people accept
and
that?
I think that's a real danger.
You can cap it at the rate of inflation, but I think another piece that's missing here is that with social housing a few decades ago, we probably would have been in social housing, but the government are absolutely intent on selling all the social housing, so that's overinflating an already overburdened rental market. So I think
social housing rents are rising faster than private sector rents at the moment. They have been for several years.
Because there's no houses.
Social
so again,
sector rents
we're
are
coming
falling
back
by
to
1% a year at the moment.
Well, they're actually rising faster than anything, but it depends. And this is one of the problems, of course, is that it depends whose statistics you want to grab. There are different statistics. On the National Audit Office's most recent statistics show that social housing rents are rising faster than earnings over the last 10 years.
They're still considerably lower than
they are
the private
considerably
rental
lower.
sector,
And they're currently falling 1% a year, but that's the government policy.
But they're also supported by the government and by institutions which are being encouraged to sell those properties.
Can I give the minister the benefit of the doubt?
He's not a minister at the moment.
Yeah, I should perhaps explain that, Victoria, that you invited me on to talk about why building on the Greenbelt isn't necessarily this. I'm not here to defend this white paper, which I haven't.
I thought we invited you on as
which I haven't even seen.
Conservative MP.
I think as a Conservative politician, your government's walking hand in hand towards Brexit with Donald Trump. I think it's important that you answer questions on government policy.
Let me make the point. I'm here to explain why building on the green belt is not necessarily the right solution. But actually, if you ask me to make the point that a government minister would make, almost all the problems which are absolutely legitimate and important problems to address are what the government is seeking to address in this white paper. Now, as I say, I'm not here to defend it because I have criticisms of it, but the points that have been made by the ladies and gentlemen here are absolutely valid points which ministers are trying to address and they're trying to deal with in this white paper.
You mentioned one thing which is constructive. We've moved from Mrs. Thatcher's "there is no society" to what you have just said, we're building communities.
I think that's really important.
And I think it is important. But what happens with building communities, you need security of tenure. And then you have the landlords moving in and smashing private tenant after private tenant with rent increases, with harassment. These are the bad landlords, there's some good ones as well. And they are smashing entire communities, making people move out, making people homeless. So how can we have what you quite rightly the government points out, building communities, when you have a landlord system that smashes those very communities?
Well, I think the gentleman over there who was a landlord, he pointed to something in the white paper which shows that ministers are trying to increase that level of security. Now, we may not get it right, but let's at least give the government and the minister the benefit of the doubt today as he announces his white paper, and then see if we can build on the sort of progress which you suggested might well be in the white paper.
Indeed.
I know you're not happy. Tell us a little bit about your own personal circumstances.
Well, personal circumstances aside for 1 minute, I campaign with Priced Out.
Can I ask you about your own experience of renting?
I have to beat Zach, actually. I've moved 6 times in the last 2 years. Admittedly,
because you've been forced to, or
a mix of stuff. A couple of bad landlords, a couple of personal things.
Right.
But I don't know how people with responsibilities do it. It's unstable enough for me, being in a broken private rented sector where I can be evicted for any reason or no reason at all with 2 months' notice. If I had a family or something to keep me in one place, it would be a nightmare.
A tweet from Steve: the housing shortage is caused in the UK by letting too many people into this country. Andrew Mitchell, does Steve have a point?
Well, the point he does have is no one knows what the immigration totals are going to be in the future, and they are a key factor in trying to plan the number of houses. So, for example, in Birmingham, there is an allocation of a figure for inward immigration, which every time we ask about it, increases or decreases by a multiple of the 6,000 houses threatened on my constituency. So with Brexit, I think these levels are even more uncertain. And for those people who are making long-term plans, they need to build that in to the plans that they are making.
Barbara says on email, I am 64 years old and I want to move from my current 2-bed home on the 2nd floor with no lift to a single-bed home, but I'm priced out of the rental market. I've worked all my life and I feel really frustrated. I started my married life in a rented room and I lost my home after I got divorced. Deborah says renting in this country is a nightmare. After 5 years, I've been given 2 months' notice to leave because the owner wants to sell. This is my home! Exclamation mark.
That's a good point. It's a home. It's not just a house. It's a home. And what landlords are doing at the moment is they're buying and selling homes as though they were commodities, just like they buy and sell shares or bags of coffee. A home is a very important part of people's lives.
Yeah.
It's your space. It's your safety net. You can't just trade in homes.
But you can, David, can't you? As a landlord, you can.
That's what I would say. We should not be doing this.
But conversely, the government is actually now pressing landlords to sell because it's increased taxes on landlords and they can no longer claim mortgage interest relief. So landlords are going to sell. I speak to many landlords who will be selling their properties.
I'm just
about to say one more thing. I think there's one problem with that. People say that will allow first-time buyers to buy those houses. I don't think that's particularly likely.
No.
But of course, it's still one person leaves to let one person in. A tenant will be evicted, so the first-time buyer will buy the house. There's no sensible thought in that policy.
And also,
and my concern about some of this is that, and I hope the white paper starts to deal with this. And someone's already made the point. We need a coherent housing strategy, not a home ownership strategy, a proper coherent housing strategy. And we've been begging for one for nearly 10 years. I hope this is it.
I can hear the frustration in your voice, David.
I'm as frustrated as everybody else.
It is to do with houses being homes.
Yes,
and
very much so.
With when you have a family, being forced to move maybe through an academic year, in the middle of an academic year, struggling to stay and remain in the same location so that your children can continue going to the same school, and even though they don't have security in terms of the home in which they live, we want them to maintain friendship groups, and because we all know that children who are parts of families who are struggling do less well in education. So it's a very important thing that parents and therefore their children feel secure, which they really don't at the moment. I also moved 11 times in 15 years with 3 children.
Wow.
So we were lucky in that we always managed to remain in the same area. But again, we needed help and support that we wouldn't have had if we'd been forced to move elsewhere.
Can I thank you all for coming on the programme?
Thank you.
And talking about your experiences. Thank you very much. And thank you to you, Andrew Mitchell. Don't look cross at me.
Was I looking cross?
Yes,
I was just thinking about what you've said about the importance of a coherent strategy, and as I understand it, that's exactly what this white paper is trying to do.
The government will set out its proposals today for fixing what it describes as England's broken housing market. It's expected to promise the building of more homes, extra help for first-time buyers and measures to make renters more secure. It's a slight shift for the Conservatives to focus on renting and perhaps an acknowledgement that with the average house costing 8 times the average salary, some of us will never be able to own our own property. Let's talk to Anne Baxendale, who is the head of policy at Shelter, and James Saunders, who is from Quintain. They're a company that today have announced they are building the UK's biggest build-to-rent project. And Lord Kerslake is with us, I think, somewhere, chair of the Peabody Trust, which is a housing association. Oh no, he's decided not to join us, but that's fine. Tell us about this big project.
So today we're announcing we're building 5,000 build-to-rent homes. Those are specialist properties aimed at the rental market at Wembley Park. Absolutely, and we see a wide range of people already living in our rental properties today. We have some already. We have doctors, we have nurses, we have local people living there. This is not just for young, this is for people are for families, these are people for older people, and they're from right across London.
Why are you doing this? Because you are in it to make money. There's no shame in that, but you're saying that this is affordable.
Well, what we're saying is we can actually build faster and we can build more homes if we have the rental model. You know, we have built to sell in the past. We've built student accommodation. Now we're building specifically for the rental market, which we think is an important market for London. It's part of the solution. It's not the only solution to the housing crisis.
But what's in it for you?
Well, obviously we can manage not just the houses, but we manage the wider estate. We're building an 86-acre estate, and actually we can manage it for the long term. We can create a great living environment. You know, ultimately, we're trying to create the best place to live in London.
And what's in it for you?
Well, we can earn rents, but the key for us is that we have a professional rental company. You know, we are a professional landlord. You know, our tenants don't pay any fees on the way in, they don't pay any inventory fees, they don't pay any agents' fees, and they get an all-inclusive package, including broadband, furniture packs if they want.
I feel like I'm missing something. Help me out here. Is there something I'm missing, or is this as good as you are claiming it to be? What do you think, Anne?
This is an important part of the picture in terms of providing new supply, but we need to be clear on the scale here that we have 11 million renters at the moment, and we're talking about build to rent, you know, in the tens of thousands. So,
but this is a help from this company.
This is helpful, and we'll always welcome any landlord who's interested in providing good conditions, longer tenancies, and giving a good home to tenants. But the scale at the moment is very small. We need to be realistic about that, and what we really need is change for the 11 million tenants who are living in private rented homes now. And
that change would include what?
What we want is longer tenancies, so 5-year tenancies for people who are renting now, and particularly in acknowledgement of the fact that we have many, many more families renting with children and many more older people. So the old stereotype of renting from 2 or 3 decades ago of young students in a bedsit on their way to getting a mortgage and just passing through, that's just no longer applicable. It's a completely different market.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're setting out, as we said, to be a professional landlord. London market in particular has been dominated by buy-to-let. So individuals who've chosen to be landlords for relatively a short-term period of time. We're setting out to be a professional landlord. That's what you see in America, that's what you see in continental Europe. You know, people that put the tenant first, customer service first.
And how long are your tenancies?
Well, at the moment we see demand. Demand is typically for a year to 18 months, but we are very open to longer tenancies. We will move with the market, and I think that's a really important point. This is the beginning of a new change in the marketplace. People have been talking about build for rent in London for a long time. It's only just beginning now, and as I said, we're at the forefront of that, building more build-to-rent homes in a single site than anybody else in the UK. We expect the market to change and the market to mature, but we're set up to do that.
We don't know the details of the formal policy document from the government. It's being announced at lunchtime when people will actually be able to read the white paper. But the wording we think so far is there'll be an incentive to landlords to offer minimum tenancies. What might that mean?
Well, we really welcome the shift in tone. It's really important that the government is now talking about renters, and that is quite a big change. So that needs to be acknowledged. But incentives are unlikely to be enough. We need much bolder action for tenants. What we've got is families raising children in a home where they can be evicted for no reason on 2 months' notice. And even if they're not evicted, they have to live with that uncertainty when they have children at school nearby, and the challenge of finding a new home that will accept children that's near the school. So this is a reality now for many people, and what we need is much bolder action that applies to all tenants, and not just very, very slow reform, because for people who are raising children now in a private rented home, they can't wait 10 years or 20 years for the change. So what we would hope to see from the government is something that helps those people right now, and that meets the scale of the ambition that they've set out over the past few days.
Let's see what happens. Charlotte says, I've been renting for 5 years now. I've moved 6 times. Living in Cambridge, it is a struggle to find affordable houses. The house I currently live in costs the same as my monthly wages. Due to this, my partner and I, at 30 years of age, have always had to have a housemate and therefore can't even think about a family or our future yet. It seems to me that landlords can simply charge what they like and there are no limits or guidance for house size, etc. Thank you both. Thank you very much. James Saunders from Quintain and Anne Baxendale from Shelter. Well, the government says today's announcement will also include a range of measures to tackle all unfair and unreasonable abuses of leasehold. Again, we don't yet know the detail, but there are hints that they will act to tackle spiralling ground rents and freeholds being traded under people's feet. Leaseholds are one of the fastest growing types of home ownership in England and Wales, but in many cases leaseholders are stung for thousands in unexpected costs, as we highlighted in our exclusive report by James Longman last week.
Thousands of homeowners are having the ground beneath them sold off, and they may not even know about it.
What do we want? Homes for Britain! When do we want them? Now!
To ease the housing crisis, new homes are going up across the country. Many are leasehold, not freehold, and the difference is crucial. The new trend is for developers to sell freeholds to investment companies.
So here's what's happening. A developer builds a house. Here it is. It sells that house to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Here they are. But what it sold is the lease to that house. That's time in it. A couple of years later, the developer is then able to sell the freehold, that's the ground that it's on, to an investment company. Here he is, Mr. Investor. It's a way of making money on the same house twice. And this whole business is worth hundreds of millions of pounds every year to the developers.
I had no idea that my home would be used as an endless income stream for an investor.
Katie Kendrick bought her home from Bellway Developers. She was never told her freehold would be sold off. Now she wants to buy it. The price has gone from £4,000 to £13,000.
Where do they get that figure from?
I have absolutely no idea. It just doesn't seem ethically right to me at all. You know, I'm not a cash point for somebody else, and I never realised that I could be used as such.
What Bellway are doing isn't illegal. Some of their buyers just feel they weren't clear about their plans. We asked them to comment, but they did not respond.
I feel guilty for my family that I've made that wrong decision. You know, it might not impact on me now in my lifetime, but you buy a home for your children to have, and you know, to give them something, you know, and it's a massive burden to leave for your children.
So how much difference will today's announcement make to leaseholders? Let's speak to Sebastian O'Kelly from the charity Leasehold Knowledge Partnership. He's also a former property journalist. Welcome to you. And Claire Scott is here. Claire's in Salford. She bought a new build leasehold property in Bolton, but later encountered many of the issues also experienced by those people in that report. Hi Claire, tell us about this property. You didn't realise after you bought it that you signed a contract that would see the ground rent shoot up.
No, that's right. We bought the house back in 2011 from a national home builder. They offered us some money to help us get onto the property ladder because we didn't have enough deposit. The whole process went really, really well, and then fast forward to 2016 last year, we came to sell the house, and it fell through at the last minute because of the ground rent clause that the buyer solicitors came across. And basically that says that we pay £295 a year, but then it doubles every 10 years until it gets to £9,440 a year by 2060. Those solicitors told the buyers that that house was not saleable, the lease was too onerous and not to buy it. So that house sale fell through. We've inquired about purchasing the freehold, again from an entity that we don't really know who's behind it. It's just whoever the home builder sold it on to. We don't know who actually owns our freehold.
So while you were in that house, the developer sold the freehold without you knowing anything about it?
Yes, so I think it happened a couple of years after we bought the house. So they just sold it on to an investment company. No one would have thought anything of it until now, until when you asked to buy it. The cheapest we've got it to at the moment is £40,000.
Right. So what impact does all this have on you?
Well, we can't sell our house. If we were to sell it, we need to get rid of that lease issue, and to do that you've got to buy the freehold at 40 grand. So either way you look at it, we've lost 25% of the value of our house.
So do you think you'll be there? That's it? You will be in that house now until, or what?
Well, no, this is what makes it worse. Back in September when we had a house buyer, our buyers were pretty much moved in. They'd ordered furniture, they'd got tradesmen all lined up to come and do modifications. It only fell through at the last minute, and we'd already completed on our next house because I'm actually heavily pregnant, and we were looking to move to another house in an area where the schools were where we wanted our child to be. So it literally was a case of there was about 5 days difference between us buying our house and our house sale falling through. So for us, we're absolutely financially crippled, riddled with worry, because we have this, what should be an asset that we've been putting money into for 5 years, is now actually a massive financial burden.
Let me bring in Sebastian. Claire, I mean, Sebastian, this is a scandal.
It is. It's a complete scandal, and the pity of it is this is PLC house builders selling these products, these leasehold houses. 8,775 of them sold in 2015, which is the last year where we have figures, and hapless first-time buyers coming off the assured short-term tenancies that you've been talking about earlier in your programme, go and buy these leasehold products and then find that they're these onerous ground rent terms which completely devalue the value of
their solicitors not doing the job that they're supposed to do.
Many of them are bought with solicitors recommended by the developers, and I can't stress how strongly, more strongly, do not ever employ a solicitor recommended by a developer. Always choose a different one. That in itself a disqualification.
Do you have any, I mean, do you know if the government's going to clamp down on this? Is this going to come up in the White Paper today?
It will be addressed in the White Paper. The Housing Minister talked about it last week. I don't think there'll be legislative action banning leasehold houses or anything like that. They will deprecate leasehold houses and onerous ground rents, but there are certain circumstances where you've got to build leasehold houses where a developer doesn't own the land, for example. But as a practice, I think it's going to be strongly discouraged. One of the main PLC house builders has stopped doing it from January the 1st as a result of our efforts. Good. Others have got to follow. I think the Help to Buy scheme, where taxpayers are underwriting people's mortgages to buy these flawed, predatory products, will also have is something that ministers can do just to stop that thing. I think throughout your programme, the one thing that hasn't really been brought up in this housing is that English housing, UK generally, but English has this awful speculative element to it, of a sort of get-rich-quick element in housing. And in leasehold, you see this very clearly. We're told that freeholds are owned by pension funds and it pays for yours and mine pension, for example. Absolute rubbish. Many of them are owned by shady companies where the directors are hidden by nominee directors or they're owned offshore. It's this speculative element that has got to end in British property.
Well, thank you for making that point. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming on the programme. Sebastian O'Kelly from the charity Leasehold Knowledge Partnership and Claire Scott.